Well, welcome everyone. I'm Ron Gerber. I'm the CEO of Angelbeat. I like holding these fireside chats. Now, I use the word fireside with a little bit of a literary license because I'm here in our worldwide Angelbeat headquarters #2, which is my basement studio during this COVID virtual world that we're all living in. But I'm so excited to have Suse and their CTO, Rob, joining me for this chat. We've seen such exponential growth in open source solutions globally. You saw this probably 10 or 15 years ago with the growth of the Linux kernel. The world is dramatically changing. I don't think I could ever have stated the following comment, namely that Microsoft is one of the top contributors to the Linux kernel even a few years ago. But I think that's indicative of how rapidly changing the world of technology is. Suse is at the leading edge of this transition or acceptance of open source technology. If I look at it, 10 years ago, it was Linux. In today's cloud-centric world, it's Kubernetes, also part of the Linux Foundation. Suse plays a leadership role in both of those sectors. Rob, why don't you introduce yourself, give some comments on your background, and then give a quick overview of Suse.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. So hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Rob Knight, and I'm Suse's CTO of Enterprise Cloud Products. I joined Suse in 2016, so been here a little while now. It's been a great journey along the way. And I spend most of my day talking to our customers and our partners around the problems that they face with cloud-native technologies and how we at Suse can help tackle them. Now, traditionally, Suse as a company, we're best known probably for our Linux distribution, SLES, which is powered some of the top Fortune 500 companies for a number of years now. But as the technology has evolved and our customers' needs have evolved, we've branched into more areas in software-defined infrastructure, and now, as Ron said, with containers and Kubernetes as well.
Excellent. Now, as you can probably tell by the contrast between my American New York accent and Rob's English accent, he's over on the other side of the pond. Maybe you could comment a little bit strategically. Are you seeing the same kind of technology trends globally? Again, you're the global CTO. This isn't a question of what's going on in Europe, the US. This is a global phenomenon.
Absolutely. And I mean, even earlier on today, I was hosting a webinar and talking to customers in the Middle East. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to those in Asia. This demand for these new technologies is happening around the world. So although while it may have started or been pioneered in America and Europe, it is now everywhere as companies are just really seeking to get that leading edge to be able to adapt, especially during the pandemic we've all had.
Got it. Now, one of the interesting things maybe you could comment is on the business model, Suse, just to put in context, and if you could just briefly describe that, how it contrasts with traditional software suppliers like an Oracle or SAP and whatnot.
Yeah, sure. We are a 100% open source company. So there is no code that Suse produces that isn't available on GitHub or out there in the public. It's quite a unique business model. There's not many companies quite like ours, and that's what makes it quite exciting to work for as well. Our customers, they pay us either for a support subscription or they pay us for some consulting professional services as well. So there's no software licensing involved, which is quite unique.
Got it. And when you look at the transition to the cloud and Kubernetes, and you contrast that to 10 years ago, I mean, it almost seems like 100 years ago in the world of technology, where back then it was more using Linux to replace on-site servers and data center infrastructure. Are you seeing open source become an even faster growing model for the cloud because so many individuals are embracing Kubernetes? You look at all the big three, AWS, GCP, and Azure, they all have Kubernetes platforms. And is it fair to maybe describe Kubernetes as almost the operating system of the cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've even referred to it before as Kubernetes is the next Linux. It is going to be the next platform that powers everyone's data center or cloud. And you're absolutely right. Open source now, it is the de facto when we start thinking about cloud. Most companies that I talk to, if they're embarking on a new project and they need a new technology, they're looking at open source solutions first and seeing how they can get value from those open source technologies.
Got it. Do you have any examples that you can share with us? Nothing confidential. As I moderate Angelbeat events, there's been so much migration already going to the cloud, either people designing cloud native applications from the start or migrating existing applications. But now, 5-10 years into the cloud, I always like to say all the easy migrations have been done. Everyone's migrated their Microsoft on-prem Exchange servers to Microsoft 365. All the relatively simplistic application be done. Now we're getting into the hard thing. It's one of the reasons why Angelbeat, we have so much interest in programs on mainframe migration or high performance computing migration. These are all applications, hardware, software combined together that so many end users feel comfortable in my data center. I can see it, I can feel and touch it. Maybe you could comment a little bit on how you work with organizations who have these mission critical applications where they might be a little bit concerned because so much is riding. If you're a bank, you can't have your ATM go down even for 30 seconds. If you're a major consumer goods company, let's say during the Ryder Cup, big, no offense, the U.S. did pretty well. I'm a golfer, so we'll see what happens next year when the Ryder Cup's played on the other side of the pond. But you can imagine the demand for golf equipment just spiked through the roof. And some of the major suppliers are during the Super Bowl or during the FIFA Cups when they play not American football, but European football on the other side. You get this tremendous demand, and they can't have it go down. So maybe you could just share examples when you've got these mission critical, needing 5.9 reliability, low latency applications, it just can't go down. How do you address some of their concerns and maybe misunderstandings that open source solutions can't be as good, if not better, than proprietary solutions?
Yeah, and I think you're spot on there, Ron, where you say there's a certain type of customer that are perhaps hesitant to consider embracing these new technologies. One of the ways that we work is leading by example. So showing these customers our existing references, having them talk to those references so that they can see actually, although you may think you have a regulatory hurdle or that this kind of new, seemingly scary technology could be a problem, the reality is the benefits that you can get from that are so significant that it would be a waste not to look into it. And at Suse, traditionally we have been dealing with those big iron customers. We've been dealing with those SAP estates ever since Suse existed. So we have a lot of experience with working with those customers and working with those technologies. And I think while some, they think in terms of just the cloud, one thing that we're really good at Suse is seeing how can we take the benefits that people get from the cloud and bring them down into the data center as well. So what technologies can we produce to give those benefits, to bring Kubernetes to the data center in a secure and reliable way so that customers can get the best of both worlds? And then as they look to things such as hybrid cloud or multi-cloud in line with their on-premise data center, how they can have one platform that kind of does it all. And for those customers, that's really where Suse's Rancher's technology has shined. I'll give a good example here. ABSA, one of the largest banks in South America, who's recently migrated onto Suse Rancher. They're predominantly on-premise. Their data center, they're a bank. If they go down, people don't get paid. Yeah. So that's how, it takes a lot of convincing. But we, after a proof of concept, they just saw the benefits of migrating to such a system.
Wow. So when you look at that, if I could dwell a little bit more in detail, you've got the capabilities where you might, let's say, put a bare metal server in your on-prem data center that has the Suse operating system or be it Linux or Kubernetes running bare metals. And then as I try to define some of these buzzwords that are going out there, if they're using one cloud provider, you've got just hybrid cloud where Suse and your team can help manage the interaction between one cloud provider, be it AWS, GCP, Azure, maybe IBM or Oracle. You can manage that. And then where the complexity grows, and I think that's part of what we've seen when you've presented at past Angelbeat events, when you combine a bare metal on-prem capabilities, so it's not just hybrid cloud, but multi-cloud, where organizations might be simultaneously using AWS, GCP, and or Azure, along with some bare metal. again, the complexity of managing such an installation and network architecture or cloud architecture is much harder. And I think when we're talking previously, you get the Google search effect, but as applied to Suse and open source management. And as you said, when let's say another bank outside of South America has a similar model and concerns, you can say, we've been there and done that. And the more that Suse does, the better it gets at providing that support, which gets them more clients, which lets your team do an even better job of supporting them. And it just becomes a self-sustaining ecosystem where each subsequent installation is better, much like in Google search, where the more searches they do, the better it gets. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, that's a good summary, but also the existing customers we rolled out to, when we learn something new in a future customer, we're able to backport those improvements or those fixes to those existing customers as well. But on the subject of multi-cloud, I think it's worth mentioning one of the things we want to do is make it as simple for people as possible to consume multi-cloud. And every cloud provider, they have their own APIs. They will all work slightly differently. You can't just copy and paste your code between the different clouds. But that's where our platform really shines, because we are deploying from a central management point, Kubernetes, into all of those clouds. All the teams need to know is Kubernetes. Doesn't matter where that's running, they can manage it in the same way, whatever cloud that's running on, because we've abstracted that underlying cloud layer. And that's something that our customers really love as well. And I think that also really enshrines the values of open source. We try as much as possible to avoid vendor lock-in. That's why we run on any cloud. If you would rather use Red Hat operating system to run our Kubernetes, that's absolutely fine. We fully support that as well. We feel that, people need to choose the best tool for the job rather than having to make compromises because of a vendor's terms and conditions.
So if you take a look at the public cloud, even though most people might think, well, Kubernetes is the same on AWS and EKS and on Google and Azure, is it fair to say that there are some subtle differences that maybe not so subtle, and if you are not taking advantage of your expertise and you do want to switch because maybe you've migrated to, I don't know, S3 storage in AWS and you want to move more of your other applications onto that, it may not be so easy as you might think. Well, it's Kubernetes everywhere. What's the big deal?
That's exactly right. And to give an example, if you deploy something to Azure AKS, the networking providers are different. The way that storage works is slightly different. The way that you get your ingress traffic into the cluster is ever so slightly different. And then you can't just copy and paste that to apply it on Amazon EKS, for example. However, if you have a central management point and you're managing all of those cloud distributions through one central place, you only need to worry about interfacing with that management point. And that's what Suse Rancher does. We're a Kubernetes management platform. People only need to worry about interacting with our API. We take care of translating all of those subtle little differences that can sometimes add up in terms of operational man hours.
Got it. And again, it boils down to all of your expertise and all of your team and providing support in knowing all these little gotchas. And I was thinking, and people listening to this, they might think, well, it's open source. I got a team of people. Why can't I just download the Linux kernel or download the latest version of Kubernetes from the Linux Foundation? It's really not that easy. And all you need to do is get burnt once by thinking that something doesn't work. And you really don't want to be the cloud architect recommending that migration, and then you want to switch over and it doesn't work. It's not a good career move, and it's not a good business move either.
And it does happen all the time, right? And don't get me wrong, there's companies out there, the Googles, the Amazons of the world, who are more than capable of building and managing all this stuff themselves without paying. However, the number of times that I've had, say, a sales call where I've talked to a customer and they'll go, oh no, my ops team, we can build and deploy our open source technology themselves, and they go ahead and do it. 6 months later, they're on the phone pretty much, begging to buy a support contract because something somewhere, hasn't worked out the way that they expected. And that's really why open source vendors and open source support, it's an insurance policy, right? Just like you insure your house and you insure your business, you're ensuring that the software that you want to use that actually powers your business is faultless. And if there is a fault, you've got someone that you can pick up the phone to and call for help.
Got it. So you referenced SAP. So if I'm a large, or I'm assuming it's the same, let's say with Oracle or some other database platforms, your advantage, and it's interesting as this is evolving, and I want to make sure I and other people out there who are listening to this get the right understanding. You can still run your SAP in the cloud. You can still run it on your open source platform. Where the individuals can save money is you may not need to pay money for Windows Server licensing or something like that. Now, from Microsoft's standpoint, which is again indicative of their new philosophy, I know they work very strategically with Suse. Their objective is whatever works for you. We're one of the leading providers of Linux kernel. We want you to run, even more so running Windows Server licenses. What we really want you to do is run your Suse on Azure. And I think, and that's the increasing strategy from these companies. So even if you're listening to it and saying, well, I get Microsoft support, or I'm a little nervous, it's not really a big deal. If you're going to remove yourself from your Windows Server, or quite honestly, let's see, if you're starting migrating some of your IBM mainframes applications onto Suse, IBM will say the same thing. That's fine, credible. Just make sure you run an IBM cloud, and that's the I think that's what everyone could feel confident in, and not worry about if you're not going to get the support you need.
Yeah, and I think it's really impressive to see how these blue chip companies have evolved to embrace open source and, like you say, become lead developers in open source, and that ultimately benefits all of our customers, all of our joint customers, because it means that they can choose the right tool for the job and choose the tools that match their company and their use case best. If they have more Windows sysadmins, that's probably what they're going to choose. But the fact that Microsoft now is embracing all of that with our strong partnership, it's the best of both worlds for everyone. As you say, as long as you're running it on Azure, they're happy.
That's exactly right. So what's next for Suse? What's the next big open source platform that you may be embracing, or are you so busy with Linux and Kubernetes that's going to keep you busy for many years to come?
Well, I'm sure that Linux and Kubernetes is going to keep us busy, but that doesn't mean that there's not more that can be done. We're finding new ways to integrate Kubernetes into environments that's never been done before. To give you a good example, we've recently launched the Harvester project, and that is open source hyperconverged infrastructure. So it allows you to run your storage, your virtual machines, and your containers all on top of an underlying Kubernetes platform, which is also helping with some customers with a lot of legacy workloads as well. But on the flip side, we're also working to make the developers' lives easier as well. We've recently launched the Rancher Desktop product. Those who have used Docker Desktop before will be familiar with that. The main difference here is, unlike Docker Desktop that's recently introduced a licensing constraint for large customers, Rancher Desktop doesn't have that. We're also working on ways that it can improve the security of Kubernetes. We want to bring things like WebAssembly for policy management into Kubernetes, and we've got a project running for that as well. We've also got AI/ML anomaly detection on Kubernetes with our Opni project. There's lots of little projects in the open source community. I say little, they may be little now, but they're going to be big in the future, that are one day going to take that Kubernetes experience to the next level, and I'm really excited for where that's going to lead us and our customers.
So when I look ahead to all the people viewing this, make sure, even if you're not a fan of open source today, you need to be aware of this, as best, again, exemplified by the rapid growth of Suse. Just went public to rave reviews. But when you look at things like Microsoft embracing open source, that to me is a seminal moment that says everyone needs to look at this. And the other thing, and again, this is a common theme of many of the comments I made to the Angelbeat community, you have to relook at your job and your responsibilities. It's all well and good to have a very detailed knowledge of Kubernetes. And that is generally fine. But where you can really advance in your career and advance your organization is be a more strategic architect. Let the Suses of the world worry about these subtle nuances between AKS and EKS and all these other acronyms out there. And don't worry about that. Worry about the strategic architecture of your applications, the business needs, add value there. And I think that's not only a function of the open source acceptance, but also the rapid acceptance of the cloud, where, again, you don't want your job to be someone who just racks and stacks servers. You want to be someone who figures out what's the right architecture, and knowing what Suse can deliver is great. The other thing maybe you could comment, Rob, because I had a misunderstanding. I thought, well, maybe Suse keeps some of its expertise around the Kubernetes product internal, so they keep some of the really best things in-house. So you mentioned AppSo, like, well, we're going to keep a couple of little proprietary things around the product for us, so when we want to pitch other banks, we can share with them that we have the expertise. But as you corrected me, and maybe you can comment on that, there's no product expertise. Anything you develop on a product size is just offered to the open source community. Your expertise, your business model is solely around services, support contracts, et cetera. Nothing proprietary. Everything you're doing, you share with the broader global audience.
Yep, absolutely. And then those project names that I mentioned just now, they're already on GitHub. These are going to be our future projects quite early in the product life cycle here. So, in a sense, our future secret source is already out there on GitHub, because that's how we engage with our community. That's how we get feedback from the open source community to make a better future product as we turn these projects into products. I think, within Suse, there's no knowledge that's proprietary. There's no code that's proprietary. Everything is out there either in our documentation or in our Git repositories. I think the only proprietary things I encounter day to day is Microsoft Teams and Slack. Those are the only proprietary things. Nothing we do in terms of customer products is proprietary at all. And that's really what's kind of unique, I think, about Suse, is that mindset of open first, putting it out there for the world to benefit first, then seeing how we can perhaps monetize it later.
That's great. What a great story. What a tremendous success. I remember visiting some of the Novell team many years ago when we did live events. We'll get back to. We did live events in Salt Lake City. So as an outsider, it's very impressive to look at the growth. And we look forward to having Rob participate and be a featured speaker at many upcoming Angelbeat seminars. I'll look forward to hearing more about these projects becoming more mainstream. And Rob, thank you again very much for your time.
Thank you, Ron. It's great to be back.
Okay, great. Bye-bye now, everyone. We'll see you at a live Angelbeat event sometime soon. And check us out again at angelbeat.com. And again, at suse.com for all the great open source platforms. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye now.